Hey there, welcome back to another Canadian Real Estate News Weekly Recap here on Bald Prairie Real Estate. My name is Matthew Pfeifer from Real Estate Agent Regina. That's my trusted assistant, Matilda. Now, the two most unaffordable provinces in Canada, BC and Ontario, have just introduced very sweeping legislative changes to address the unaffordable housing crisis that those two provinces have. The question now is, how is this going to impact the real estate market? And will it actually work? We'll be talking about that and a whole bunch more on this week's news recap. But of course, let's start off with another terrible joke. All winter long, I've been working out trying to get rid of my winter fat, but all that's happened is I've been left with spring rolls. If you have a terrible joke that I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's get into the news. The first topic here is Canada's new first-time homebuyer tax-free savings account. I saw a great meme about this. Canadians were asking for more unaffordable housing, and instead they got a tax-free savings account. Awesome, right? Well, let's at least talk about it and what this means for you. So first off, you can make a maximum of an $8,000 per year contribution to this tax-free savings account, and you can contribute a maximum of $40,000 into this account. Now, it is allowed to grow just like a tax-free savings account can. So the same rules that govern tax-free savings accounts also apply to this. So if that were to grow with the investments you have in there, that's perfectly fine. But again, you can only put $40,000 of your own money into this tax-free savings account. If you do not use it, it can be converted into an RSP. So it's an additional savings tool for Canadians. I'm not really sure why we needed an additional tax-free savings account. TFSAs already exist. We need more affordable housing in Canada, not a better way to save. But hey, I'll take less taxes to go towards a house anytime I can get it. Next up, and it seems I've been talking about this almost weekly now, another real estate agent getting in trouble. I almost need to start a whole brand new series called Real Estate Agents Misbehaving or Behaving Badly or something like that. In this case here, it was a Calgary real estate agent and mortgage broker that has been charged with multiple counts of fraud. And it's the usual things: forging mortgage documents, income documents, residency status, the whole works. Now, they were actually originally suspended in 2020 while this ongoing investigation was going on, and yet they actually continue to act as both a mortgage broker and a real estate agent without a license for either. That's actually impressive all in itself in a rather sad way. And then now that this investigation has concluded, they have been fined $150,000, had both licenses completely revoked, and they're not eligible to have either a mortgage broker or a real estate license for 10 years. Now, if you're wondering if the person you're looking to hire has got a license or if they've had any sort of disciplinary action, you can actually go to the regulatory body for your province and you can look up that individual and see if they hold the license and any sort of disciplinary actions, fines, etc. that they've had against them. So if you're unsure, check that out. Stats Canada is out with its newest job report, and once again, Canada added a whole heck of a lot of jobs. 35,000 jobs added last month, and the unemployment rate was at 5%. What does this have to do with Canadian real estate? Well, two reasons. First off is people that have jobs, well, they're going to be less likely to be in a financial situation where they're forced to sell their house or they end up in a foreclosure process. Those two, of course, would result in downward pressure on prices. And secondly, people that have jobs are more likely and more willing to want to buy houses. That, of course, will put upward pressure on prices if there's more buyers out there. Next up is kind of an update report from TD on the Canadian real estate market and their forecast for the 2023 Canadian real estate market. Now, they had projected or forecasting that we would see sales volume and prices bottom out in the spring of this year and then slowly start working their way back up. And TD wasn't the only one that was projecting this. A lot of different banks and economists were also saying that. I put that in my 2023 forecast video that I expected we'd see kind of a similar pattern as well. And now it's starting to look like this forecast is almost kind of in the rearview mirror, because when you see my monthly Canadian real estate market update, which that video is coming out real shortly, you're going to see that it appears we've already hit that bottom because sales volumes the last 2 months have been working their way up, as have prices. So this is in line with the forecast, but seems to be happening a little bit earlier than most people, including myself, were expecting, but it's following the pattern that was set out by all these different banks and the economists. So we'll have to see if this trend continues or not. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this week's news recap. The BC and Ontario housing plans to address unaffordable housing in those two provinces. Let's start off with BC here. First off, none of these plans I'm going to talk about here will take effect till the fall. So none of this is immediate. There's going to be a lag time before this comes into effect. Let's run down these quick regulations here. When it comes to single family zoning, city councils must approve projects where there's 4 or fewer units being built on a single family home, as long as it meets the setback, safety requirements, etc. So they cannot deny this to someone who wants to tear down a house and build a fourplex in single family zoning. All secondary suites will be legal, of course, as long as they meet proper safety and building code requirements. There's a $400 income-tested renter tax credit, a $40,000 loan for homeowners building secondary suites on their property or in their basement, and it is actually going to be forgivable if they rent those properties out for 5 years below market rent. And then there's an anti-flipping tax. My thoughts on this, first of all, more density, more homes. I'm happy with that, but that's something we badly need, not just in BC and Ontario, but across Canada. So this is good. The $400 tax credit for renters, so about $33 a month. I'm sure if you ask anybody that's renting, $33 a month is probably not going to make much difference to them. I guess this is good, but really it's kind of more just a political statement. Hey, look, we're helping out renters with a tax credit. It's not going to have much meaningful impact. The $40,000 loan to get secondary suites, I love the idea of this, especially making it forgivable for those that are going to build these and have them rented out below market rent. Great idea. The problem I see with this is that $40,000 probably isn't going to get you anywhere near what you need to actually build these suites, whether it's, you know, a laneway type suite, or if you're just taking an existing house and putting in a basement suite, you're going to easily exceed that $40,000. So we'll have to see if this really moves the needle and makes this more affordable for people that are looking to make these changes in their houses. But again, I'm glad to move in this direction. I just think they're probably going to have to take this even further potentially. What else we got here? Sorry, I missed the flipping tax. That's the big one here. This is politically popular. I think, though, it's not well thought out, and kind of for 2 reasons. There's obviously a segment of the market, businesses that are built around taking run down, beat up houses that don't have a lot of desirability, fixing them up, getting them up to modern standard, you know, making sure that these are actually potentially even livable, and that they're desirable for buyers that want to buy these houses that don't have the ability or the resources to take on an entire project like this. If we're now taxing those businesses, those people that do this type of transaction, well, they're obviously less inclined to do so. It's not going to improve the quality of housing in many markets. Second is the new construction market. There is this whole segment of the market when a construction project needs to get off the ground, you need to get the financing, and most banks will put a requirement for how many pre-sales you need to have as a developer before they'll advance construction funding. Typically, it's 60, 70, 80% pre-sold. Generally, these are bought by investors. They're going to help get this project. They're funding it essentially to get it off the ground, because usually it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years before the end user is going to be able to take possession of that unit. Now, very few end users can afford or want to wait 3, 4, 5 years for these projects to actually get off the ground. That's where these investors come in, and they are flipping. They're looking to make a profit on these. So all of a sudden now, if we're adding an additional tax onto them, they're going to be less inclined to actually make these investments. And of course, that's not going to make housing any more affordable for the end user. That tax is just going to get applied to them. So we're going to hurt new construction and make it more expensive all at the same time. Now let's talk about the Ontario Housing Plan. Now they have a goal of seeing 1.5 million new homes built over the next decade. So they clearly realize they need to get more homes built. They've got a whole host of things they want to see to get these homes actually built. I've talked about it in previous videos, but let's just talk about the most recent changes they're looking to make. So first off, a lot of this is going to be really similar to what we're seeing in other jurisdictions in Canada, overriding municipal zoning to allow in single family zone areas, multifamily homes to be built. They're also going to withhold funding from the province to municipalities for projects the municipalities are looking to do if they don't speed up their approval process. That's a huge problem across Canada, how long it takes to actually get building permits issued. So they're going to withhold funding unless this gets improved. They've also got a couple of things. They're going to reduce some fees on projects. I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a second here. And they're going to have a kind of, or they've proposed at least, a cooling off period similar to what's available in BC for new construction, where buyers can back out of contracts within a certain period of time. They've also got some changes on the rental side of things. They're going to provide significantly more funding for the landlord-tenant board in Ontario, which anybody who's been in that realm, whether you're a renter or a landlord, knows that that process takes way too long. There's way too much of a backlog. I think something like a 2-year backlog in Ontario right now. That's just unacceptable. So they need to speed that process up. It needs to be better for both tenants and for landlords. And then they've also got a policy in place that's designed to stop rent evictions. That is where a landlord tells a tenant, you got to get out because I'm doing a renovation, and sometimes they don't do those renovations because they just want the tenant out to put a new tenant who's willing to pay more in there. So what they're proposing is that after those renovations have been completed, there's a 60-day window where that previous tenant is going to be allowed to move back in at their previous rental rate, and the landlord has to prove that for the tenant or the work to be completed, the tenant needs to leave. So they're going to have to be able to actually prove that. So this is actually some good steps forward. Again, they need to make sure that they get that landlord-tenant board approval process, everything else sped up because it's way too slow in Ontario. Now we got to talk about, in my mind, what's the biggest elephant in the room here, and that is all the governments in Canada talk about housing affordability. We need to make housing more affordable, and yet have you noticed that none of them, okay, give Ontario just a tiny little bit of credit here, but none of them want to talk about reducing or eliminating things like land transfer taxes, taxes on new developments, fees associated with new developments. I wonder why that is. Maybe because it's a giant cash cow for these provinces and municipalities. I think Toronto itself took something in like $1.5 billion in land transfer taxes just last year. None of them are willing to eliminate that. They all talk that big game, but when it's time to put their money where their mouth is, they'll make sure that they're getting their piece of the pie of the Canadian real estate market. Often the cost of buying a house, whether it's used or new, is 25 to 35% government taxes. And they're not going to reduce that, but they're going to talk about affordable housing in Canada. If you really want more affordable housing in Canada, we need to get more homes built, and we need to get the government stop treating housing as a revenue generation tool and going back to actually being housing for Canadians. Okay, that's my rant for this week. I get a little frustrated with hypocrisy of governments in Canada talking about affordable housing, but then taxing the crap out of housing in Canada, and it gets me a little riled out. But if you haven't already, here's my most recent monthly Canadian housing market update. Check that one out. Please, if you like this video, give this video a like, subscribe to Bald Prairie Real Estate if you haven't already. And as always, guys, thanks very much for watching.